On today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast, we are joined by the Pistons Pulse podcast. We are joined by Bryce Simon, Omari Sankofa II. We'll talk about everything Detroit Piston, what's going on this offseason, what should you look forward to. We'll talk about all that in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Koo Cahill. You can find me over on Twitter at Koo Cahill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on today. All right, so guys, I just want to let you all know listening, we've decided that I'm going to make this a two-part episode. We're not going to be able to stick to 30 minutes. It's just not going to happen. I know for a fact it won't happen. Bryce has been on the podcast many times. Every time we've recorded with Bryce, it's went over like 40 minutes. Amari's been on it. It's went over 40 minutes. So
I'm pretty sure Locked On said I couldn't come back, Koo. Like they just said, hey, you guys, you can't stay to 30 minutes. You can't have Bryce back. It's
banned. Wow.
Banned.
It got. I mean, they were getting close to banning me. Shoot. So this is gonna be a two-part episode. So an hour long. I'll split it up into two. So stay tuned for the second part. But like I told them before, I got a brief outline, but we're really just going to go wherever this takes us. So, Bryce, Omari, obviously, I want to thank you guys for coming on. And obviously, everyone who listens to this podcast, go to the Pistons Pulse, check them out. I'm sure you guys already do, but if you don't, definitely check out the Pistons Pulse. Appreciate you guys coming on. But let's go ahead and start with this. I'm sorry, I didn't really tell you guys what the topics were beforehand. Bryce knows this, Omar. I like catching them off guard. Just like I don't want them to be prepared. I want to get like a raw reaction. You feel me?
Yeah, oh, that's cool.
All right, so this is what I want to ask about. Me and Bryce were kind of talking about this the other day.
Yep.
The topic I have written here is reality of the situation. So I'll start it off, and I want to hear from you guys. Obviously, the Pistons community, there's going to be a lot of talk about is there going to be a big trade? Who's going to stay around? What's the roster going to look like next year? Are they keeping Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, or Sar Thompson? Are they moving off of them? Like, what's going to happen? And there's a lot of talk from different perspectives on it. And I listened to really what caused this topic for me is I listened to your guys' podcast. This last one with Sam Vecini of The Athletic. And I felt like it would be a perfect time to talk to you guys about the reality of this situation. So Sam spoke about in your guys' podcast, and there's a lot of Pistons fans that have been telling me the same stuff. They want to see this kind of thing happen. And I don't want to put words in his mouth. I don't want to put words in Pistons fans' mouths. But mostly what I'm trying to get to is that should the Pistons take it slow? Should they really move off their young core? Should they just add to it and just let it develop organically? I'll say this. I don't think that's the reality of the situation the Pistons are in. I think people can feel that way. I think there's an argument. Obviously, there's an argument for that to be the best route. But I don't think that's the reality we are living in now. I'll end that there. I'll give more of my thoughts, but I want to hear from you guys. Do you guys think that's actually do you guys think that's within the realm of reality for the Pistons this offseason?
Yeah, I think when you have a 14-win team, I think the path's probably going to be longer than you want regardless. Like, I don't know if there's ever been a 14-win team that turned around and became like a real contender in 2 years. Like, I just checked Houston. I mean, they weren't 14 wins back. They were 17 a few years ago, but it still took a good 3 years for their young guys to grow up and to really find the right free agents when you finally do cash in. So just look at it from that standpoint. Like, part of you thinks, regardless of what the next president wants to do, is going to be somewhat of a longer process. But obviously, there's different ways you could go about it, right? You could go and really try to upgrade the roster as best as you can this offseason. You have the most cap space. So you could do something on some level, thread the needle between keeping young guys because you still are in a rebuild mode, but at the same time, since you don't have draft picks, you have to, it takes money to make money. So you have to sort through the roster pretty seriously. Like, all of that to me is just going to be a long process. So it's really just, do you go for straight talent in free agency, or do you leverage that cap space for assets and you kind of slow roll this thing? And I think those are basically the two paths. So really it boils down to how good do you think this team could be next season if you do go all the way in. Yeah, if it's a 30-win outcome, is that worthwhile? I mean, there's a lot that they're going to have to ask themselves, but to me, that's what it boils down to. It's going to take long regardless. It's just, do you take the extra long route or just the long route?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this, Koo, and we talked about Sam. So I think where this comes from is Sam kind of talked about maybe really slow playing it, right? Like essentially being bad again next year, quote unquote tanking or whatever, positioning yourself for Cooper Flag and Ace Bailey.
And it's not just Sam. I want to make that clear. It's not just, there's a lot of Pistons fans I'm talking to that have talked to me. It's like, hey, just let's be slow about this. Let's
surprised me, to be honest.
Yeah, it's not just Sam. I want to make that clear. But go ahead.
No, we can call out Sam Vecini. Like it's fun. Let's do it. No. If you guys don't know, I work with Sam over at Game Theory on his podcast, so I'm allowed to say those things. But listen, I told you, Koo, I kind of disagreed with Sam on that. I thought what he came on the Pistons Pulse and talked about a lot was really good. He made a lot of really good points, talked about a lot of different things. I don't necessarily agree in terms of you have to completely keep all the young guys, add another young guy, keep trying to get young talent, whatever. I don't think you can grow all of this young talent anyway. This is one thing I've talked about even with this pick is how many of these guys can you prioritize, Koo? Like Cade is a priority number 1, 2, and 3. Can you prioritize Jaden, Jalen, Asar, Marcus, draft pick, Isaiah? Like, can you prioritize all those guys at the same time? I don't know that you can. And so that's another reason why I'm a little okay if you do move off some of the young core to get better. Now, I don't think that get better puts you in, title contention, but I think it's okay if this organization starts making moves to take step forward. You get to 30 wins. Okay, how did that work? All right, now we need to go get this guy in free agency. Let's do that. Oh, now we need to make another trade. So maybe the moves this summer are the moves that then get you to the next move. But if not, then trade Cade Cunningham now, is my opinion. If you're not going to start building it out around him, then you might as well move on from him and almost start all over. And I don't want to do that.
And that's why it's just a situation you have to essentially thread the needle, because you do probably want to extend Cade this offseason, lock his future, and he's a number 1 pick. So, I mean, unless it's a unique situation, we've seen that you're probably going to want to just lock that down immediately. So you don't want to slow roll it too much, as Bryce was saying. But with that, just because you have so much cap space, you could almost do both options at once, whereas you bring most of the young guys into the season. You're still a year away from having to pay Ivy and or Duran. So you could evaluate at least them through half of the season until you get to the deadline. And then it could be more of a deadline. Okay, now we need to figure out where we're investing, because at that point it becomes a financial question, right? Because you can't pay everybody. So you have to make these decisions sooner rather than later. So you could just use your cap space to just bring guys in on really big, 2 or 3 year deals, right? Like, hey, like we'll give you a team option for the second year, but you're going to make X amount the first year. You could essentially do both at once, still get better next year, still be in the Cooper Flag sweepstakes, and then also make those bigger decisions at the trade deadline, because those guys aren't going to lose their value. If anything, they can only gain from this point on.
Bryce, you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I was just saying that would be my only worry is let's say you give Malik Monk and Isaiah Hartenstein the Bruce Brown contract from last offseason, right? Like those are 2 guys I really like, and just say, hey, we're going to get better. We're going to make this roster around Cade better, Koo. But my worry is then if those guys beat out Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duran and take a bunch of their minutes, what is the trade value of those 2 guys? Can you package those 2 guys with the pick and whatever to go get? Again, I don't love Brandon Ingram specifically, but a Brandon Ingram type player. I think Brandon Ingram, Koo, is a really good example of part of his is you're going to have to pay him big money, but BI could be the trade that then leads to the trade. You know what I mean? You could bring him in. He instantly makes you better, even though he's not perfect with Cade. But then, eventually down the road, 2-3 years from now, after you've put yourself in better position, you're going to package him with somebody else. And maybe BI is not the right age for that, but I don't mind that path. One last thing. When Omari says thread the needle, I think that's what Troy Weaver in the front office has put this organization in, though, is there's not multiple outs. The Oklahoma City Thunders guys have plenty of outs. They have plenty of needles they can thread. The Pistons do have a very, very thin needle that they have to thread to build this thing out.
Yeah, I agree with most of everything you guys are saying here. I think that the reason why I wanted to talk about this with you guys and get your guys' perspective on it is because from what I understand and the things that I've heard and watching, obviously we've all watched this team this year and we know the situation that they're in. Cade's up for this extension this offseason. The idea of, I don't want to say kicking the can down the road, but I mean, I kind of, and taking on bad contracts or, waiting another year. That was like 3 years ago. That was 2 years ago. Like when Troy should have been taking on bad contracts for picks 3 years ago, 2 years ago. That should have been what they did. And instead they went the route of signing Jeremy Grant, Mason Plumlee, and they decided to use that to fill up the cap space instead of taking the OKC route of we're going to take on bad contract after bad contract. We're going to stack up these first round picks. And then in 4 years we'll have, whatever. They missed their mark with that. They're past that time now. Like you cannot do that. And the reason why I say I call it the reality of the situation is the reality is the Pistons are probably going to move one of their young guys this offseason, I feel like that is just where they're at now. They are in the position where Cade's up for this rookie extension, and he needs to be shown that they're trying to win games, that they are trying to take this next step forward. And the clock, I know the clock will technically start ticking, I guess, once he signs it, but the clock really has already been ticking. Like it's been ticking since you drafted him. And for the last 3 years, you've done nothing really to show him that he should believe in where this team is moving forward. So if you go up to Cade Cunningham this offseason when he's going to sign this rookie extension, it's like, hey, Cade, we think it's better suited for us, maybe play it slow again next year. We're probably going to be really bad, and then we'll try again next year. That is not going to go over well with Cade. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You get last-minute deals, save up to 60% off buying last-minute for sports, concert, comedy, and theater events near you. Save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats for you. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry with Game Time ticket coverage. You can take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed with Game Time. So the reality of the situation is, like you said, Bryce, we were talking about this the other day. If the reality of your situation is you want Cade, you want to extend him, and that's your franchise player, then this is the reality of where you're at. You have to make moves. You need to go get better because you cannot sign Cade and then also say, hey, Cade, we're going to take it slow because in 12 months you will begin a trade request. Like that, like 2 years, you will begin that trade request if you just continue to take things slow and tell them, hey, we're not going to we're going to try to take it slow again. That's just not where they're at.
And I think I believe enough in Cade as a player that's why I think it's a lot of people from the outside will go, well, they won 14 games. Teams that win 14 games don't have this type of offseason. I also want to be clear. I'm not saying you go throw the bag at every single player and make stupid decisions and, all of those type of things. The free agency is going to play out the way it plays out. Guys on the trade market or there's other teams with way better assets. So the Pistons aren't going to be at the top of the line to acquire whatever player. I'm just saying, let's strategically do this thing. One other thing, Omari, and I don't think we have any updates on this, but is the new head of what was it? Head of basketball operations.
Head of basketball operations.
I refuse to say the shortened version. So
Hobo.
No, we are not calling it that. Koo, can you?
They call it that.
Koo, can you?
They could have said president. They said head.
I don't care what they want to do.
So
Koo, are you calling it the hobo Koo?
So I called it Pobo. But then, now that you're saying it, I see why you don't want to say it.
I would have said Pobo if it was president of basketball operations. They have named it head of basketball operations. And
I'm not calling it hobo. No,
Thank you. See, Omari, I'm right here.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but you alluded to it, so I was like, it's the hobo. That's what you were alluding to.
I don't care. I will take the extra 3 seconds to say head of basketball operations.
Okay.
What if that person doesn't like Jaden Ivey's game? What if he doesn't think that Omari, we've talked about this. I'm sure, Koo, you have it on the outline about the 2-guard backcourt. Does it work in the NBA? Look at the best teams in the league and how many of them are their 2 best players in the backcourt. Maybe they value, Koo, we talked about this the other day, a stretch big as opposed to that's not what Jalen Duren does, right? So this new decision maker, we may see the young core get shaken up just simply because their vision doesn't meet what some of these players are.
And I want to say something. That's a good way to segue into the next topic. Like you mentioned, it is on the outline, Bryce. You're very smart. But I want to say something that you said, or echo something you said. This does not mean that you go all in and make stupid moves and like long-term contracts. Like Omari said, and you also said this, but like you take 2 to 3 year contracts. You trade for players on 2-3 year deals. So in 2 years, they're on expirings. You can move off of them. You sign guys to 2 to 3 year contracts who have team options on the back end. You still maintain that long-term flexibility to where, like you said, Bryce, you can get to 30 wins, and now you still have the flexibility to be like, okay, we finally got to 30. We have the flexibility. Now we know what we need to get to 40. Now you get to 40. It's like, okay, we can do this. We get to 50. Like, that's why it's so frustrating to me when I hear people say, well, that player is not going to be a starter on a championship team. The Pistons are so far away from like championship team that should not even be close to like what you're caring about.
Like, let's get them starters for like an NBA team.
Right.
Like, let's start there.
Real quick, let's just say like, okay, Tobias Harris. And I don't think they should sign Tobias Harris, to be clear. And if they do, it should be on a 1-year deal. But I know Pistons fans are watching Tobias Harris in the playoffs, guys, and going, see, he sucks. He's not any good. I'm like, it's a playoff series. Like, it's different than what the
Pistons won't be in a playoff series with Tobias Harris at any point.
Exactly. Now that's not a great example because, again, I don't think that that's where they should go, again, unless it's like solely on a 1-year contract type of thing. But it hit me the other day watching him, like, this isn't the environment he's going to be playing in with the Pistons. Like, it's not, we don't need 16 game guys. That's what they call playoff ready guys. 82 game guys are fine for where the Pistons are at right now.
Exactly. And
walk before you run.
Yes, thank you.
Or in this case, crawl before you run.
Right. Like, or crawl. Let's get from crawling to walking.
Let's get from crawling to walking.
Let's just get to walking first.
Yeah.
And then the last point I want to echo that you said, Bryce, is that the next guy you get, like if you were to trade for an Ingram or somebody, like that does not mean he's going to be on your team in 2 years. Like you could then use him and then make another trade 2 years down the line. Like the idea that any move the Pistons make this offseason is the last move that they can make and now they're stuck. It's simply not true. I know everyone's terrified from the Blake Griffin situation, but it's not the same at all. They're not in the same situation. Omari, is there something you wanted to say before we move on?
I would say one reason why I think this offseason could be unique and could present an opportunity for the Pistons to maybe get a better player than you would expect is just because you're going to have teams that are going to look to shed salary. So that's the one thing I'm curious about is, you have OKC that's got 1 million draft picks and you have other teams that are probably better equipped from an asset standpoint, but like Detroit's the perfect dumping ground to get like a B player, like a C+ player, like solid rotation guys and just absorb them right. And essentially what you did last year, but because there's more CBA pressure this year, I'm just curious to see if that can help them get lucky a little bit, because that's one thing they haven't really had either. It's just luck. So
that's one where Brandon Ingram may come way cheaper than what you think. I know James Edwards, wrote about how it would cost a lot for him.
Yeah.
But when you consider his contract and the salary cap implications, and that New Orleans could dump him and really gain salary cap because the Pistons would only have to send back what New Orleans would want. This was the Karl-Anthony Towns thing. Like, I thought at one point, like if Minnesota would have got swept in the first round, and they look awesome right now, like shoot, they may go win the whole thing. But let's say first round went really bad, again, I'm not saying Karl-Anthony Towns is the answer, but I think the Pistons potentially could have got him for way less than market value because of the size of his contract. And the Timberwolves have never in their history paid the luxury tax the way they were going to be asked to this offseason.
And now they have this ownership feud.
The ownership feud, like all of that stuff. And so that second apron is a real thing that could lower some of these guys' value on the trade market if teams are looking to open up cap space.
Yeah, it's going to be that seems to be the basket they've put their eggs in for the last 4 years. And it looks like it may finally come to fruition where it may finally open itself up to happen.
The other guys, like the Sin contract thing, like Joe Harris was an awful Sin contract, right? Like, and listen, I wasn't as upset about that at the time as what it turned out to be. There are guys that are good players on Sin contracts. So Andrew Wiggins is a name that will be brought up a lot. I don't like how long Andrew Wiggins' contract is, but that is one where he's at least a productive player. And maybe depending on what's going on with him personally, like if you told me they could trade for Andrew Wiggins and Moses Moody because the Warriors just needed to get off the money, is that something they should at least think about? I think they should at least think about it. I'm not saying because again, that contract's 3 years out and that's tough to deal with, but there are Sin contracts that do still make your teammate better, even if the player's overpaid.
Right. And I think, and I was going to bring up another name, but I'll leave that alone. I won't bring it up.
No, bring one. Let's talk about it.
No, I was just going to say, like, I think Pistons fans would have called Duncan Robinson one last
Sure.
offseason.
No, that's a great example.
Yeah. And he look at what he's doing now. So you're completely correct that there's going to be good players that are available on heavier contracts. They're going to be overpaid, but they could be useful for the Pistons, especially to take up that cap space until, they're ready to then make another move to get to the next step. So,
and maybe Andrew
getting
Wiggins,
80 cents on the dollar would be an improvement from where the Pistons are now.
Right.
At some point, you need that money. If you really want to star to pair with Cade, you're going to need that contract value to go make the trade anyway and match money. So, I mean, again, there's some forward thinking to it, but if those are the type of contracts I would rather the new decision maker trade for, as opposed to completely washed up Joe Harris and you got a second round pick or whatever it was. Like that was a bad deal. I don't want to see any of those this summer.
Right. I don't want to see that either, but let's go ahead and move on to the next topic now. So I've been talking about this on the podcast probably for 2 weeks now. I've been very adamant. I've been very aggressive about it. Like I've been very, like I've planted my ground and I'm staying there. Like I've picked my side and I'm not getting moved off it. Like I feel very firmly about this. I want to bring it up to you guys. Bryce, you brought it up earlier. Let's talk about Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren. So someone tweeted me this, and I think this is literally the exact, like it's the perfect explanation of where I'm at with these two guys. So I want to read this tweet and then we'll get to talking about them and I get your guys' thoughts. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You've already talked about that, but there is so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed events where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers. You can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go. So this tweet is from Age of Crabnose on Twitter. He tweeted me. He said, I think people want Pistons to be very good or to very good player hunt because they think Ivy and Duren might just be mid. So their value is highest now because of potential, which is a perspective that you can have. And that is probably exactly where I'm at. A lot of people there's some people, a lot of Pistons fans that don't want to move off of Ivy. They don't want to move off of Duren. They think they can be great. They can, it won't shock me in like few years that they are good, that they are really good. I think right now the Pistons those two prospects, I don't think they're as good as everyone thinks they are. And my thing is kind of what you mentioned earlier, Bryce, is that if you do go the route of, and I talked about this with James as well, probably like a month and a half ago when he came on, that if you do go the route of signing guys that will just play over them, that Duren will go to the bench and Ivy will go to the bench, if you do that, their value almost surely will not be going higher. It almost surely will not be higher than it is right now. Also, if you wait on trading one of Ivy or Duren, or maybe even both, who knows, but trading one of them, if you wait, I feel as if the longer you wait, the more the mystique of them as a prospect rubs off their value. And for me, I think the mystique of them as a prospect is what's really carrying them right now as a valuable asset. I don't necessarily, in my opinion, feel like their play is what's carrying their value as an asset. It's more so he's 20 years old. He's 22 years old. He was just drafted 2 years ago. I had them high on my draft board 2 years ago. They can be great for me. I can turn them into what I believe they were 2 years ago. You wait another year, I think that rubs off. The farther you get away from that, the more the value drops off. A very extreme example of this. Please, for the love of God, don't take this too serious, Pistons fans. But you guys, the name I use, you guys are going to kill me for it. But it's just follow the idea of it. If you would have tried to trade Killian Hayes right after the draft, it would have been you would have got astronaut. It would have been way higher value after the draft because he's the prospect. He's the prospect at that draft, and you haven't seen him yet. Even after Killian's rookie season, if you trade him after his rookie season, the value would have been higher. The farther you got away from the draft, the lower his value got because he's no longer the prospect. The mystique is gone. So that's why I'm at the point. I don't believe, in my opinion, I don't believe Ivy and Duran are going to be that. I don't think at this point I feel comfortable saying they're going to be great players. I don't think and if they are, I think they're years away from it. And I think the best time to jump on that and take advantage of it before the value really goes down is right now in this offseason. So that's where I stand. I want to hear from you guys. What do you guys think about that perspective, that stance? Do you guys agree, disagree with it? I want to hear from you guys.
So I guess the variable is how good they will be by the trade deadline, right? Because ideally you probably want to make a decision before the extension, and you could bring it into the extension window if you wanted to. But the main thing is that we don't know what their value will be in the future because we don't know what their trajectories will be. Of course, Killian's value never went up because he never proved that he could be an every night player. If Duran comes out next season doing everything he did this year, but he's also adequate on defense and this and that, but now his value just went way up, right? Because right now, how many teams are really itching for a 20-year-old center that can't defend right now? Probably not a whole lot of teams. Same for Ivy. How many teams are itching for a guard who's very athletic, can make things happen, but also has struggled to shoot and defend so far. So, I could see it going either way, but I think a lot of it, as you mentioned earlier, could really just comes down to how good you think those guys are. If you're already out, then yeah, maybe you just get what you can now. If you still see them as having potential to be core players, it probably does make sense to wait until the trade deadline. And then if one or both have like breakout seasons, well, maybe at that point you don't even want to trade them, right? Or if you do, you could drive a higher bargain than you did previously because now you're talking about what they're actually doing. So to me, I think it just really comes down to your opinion of those players, right? If you think that they're not going to, become the players the Pistons need, then yeah, their value is probably highest now. But if you still see them as having that potential, even if it's 2-3 years down the road, then to me, I think that value will hold, up until they actually get paid.
I think I want to say, can I say this to you real quick, Bryce?
For sure.
This was something I brought up to one of my listeners that they DM'd me, and I told them I was going to bring this up to you on here.
Yeah.
They actually remembered this and wanted me to remember it, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll bring it up to Bryce. A few years ago, Bryce, you came on the podcast, like it was 2 years ago, and you came on the podcast probably like 40 times 2 years. So I don't know what podcast it was, but one of the podcasts, we talked about this literally 2 years ago. Like when I think it was Cade's rookie season. One of the things they said you told me was that the Pistons' plan should be to get your guys, identify your cornerstones, and then whoever outside, then you move everyone else to then supplant to fit around your cornerstones. So you fast forward 2 years. I feel as if they've identified their cornerstone. It's Cade Cunningham. And it seems like, I'm not saying I feel this way. It seems like to me, based on what we're reading, that they probably hold Asar in that higher regard, like not untouchable, but he seems close to it. So if that is the case to me, I feel like everyone agreed with that take 2 years ago. It's just like now that we're here, everyone's scared to do it. That's where I feel. What do you think?
No, that's good. That's really good perspective. I'm impressed that a listener remembered something I said 2 years ago.
I forget who it was. I forget who it was. I should shout out.
I say, yes, DM me and let me know. Cause I'm like, dang, somebody actually listened to something 2 years ago and remembered. I'm too old to remember anything I said 2 weeks ago, let alone 2 years ago. Here's the thing is like, I think I was right when I said it. And what happens though, is you watch these guys and you're like, oh, but what if? And like you said, you and I have talked a lot about Jaden Ivey over the last 48, 72 hours. I was pretty high on Jaden Ivey. I've always been a Jaden Ivey guy. And so there is a little bit of, I want to be right. Like I don't want to be wrong about my evaluation with him. I will say, and Omari, oh, my bad, man. Omari was the first one that brought it up to me. And Koo, you've been preaching it of, does this 2-guard backcourt, like, is this really how NBA teams are built these days? And so I want to come back to that. I want to answer the person's question. I'm comfortable at this point. Here's what I was thinking as you guys were talking is I wouldn't actively shop any of these young guys. Like I wouldn't call 29 other teams. Hey, you want Jaden Ivey? You want Jaden Ivey? You want Jaden Ivey? But I would very much be willing this offseason to listen to any offer that brings me a star player that fits better around Cade Cunningham, that involves this year's draft pick, Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey, and even Asar to an extent. And I would be willing to listen to those. What I would not do is package 3 of those guys. So those are the trades I don't like, where it's Jaden, Jalen, and this year's draft pick, unless we're talking like a big time get. Does that make sense?
So not the one that's going around everywhere is the one James suggested, where it's Mikal Bridges, Claxton, and DFS for the 3 guys you mentioned.
Yeah. So if I'm getting Bridges plus DFS plus Claxton, like I don't like the thing I didn't like about that trade is all 3 of those guys. I still want to keep some young. It also depends where the draft pick is, right? Because the other thing is, if I'm not getting Alex Sarr, am I sure I want to move on Jalen Duren right now? Because do I know I'm going to sign Isaiah Hartenstein in the summer? I don't know those things. So I think there's a little bit of like, these things have to work together. I still want to keep some of my young players. You know what I mean? I don't want to get rid of all of them. I think Mikal Bridges is like the perfect guy to bring in and play off of Cade Cunningham, though. So that's why I did support that idea that James brought up.
So did you say you wanted to get back to that other point you wanted to
get
on? Go ahead.
So this is a little more Jaden Ivey. So let's just go through the teams in the top 10.
If we want to, we can just move on to the whole, we can move past this and go to the 2-guard Jaden Ivey stuff.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Boston Celtics, 2 best. Just how many of these teams are their 2 best players in the backcourt? Boston Celtics? No. Wings. The Knicks? They have 1. And I thought it was interesting, Omari. I don't know what you thought. When Sam brought up Cade comparing him to Jalen Brunson, I thought that was kind of interesting, right? Completely different body types, but kind of the archetype in the role was interesting to me. That team's built around 1 ball handler, floor spacers, defenders, really good bigs.
No, it's funny because when I was watching Brunson put up however many points he put up the other night, like 47, and just the way he was maneuvering past guys, I actually thought like that's like Cade a little bit, right? Like he just knows how to use his body, like find those spots, just like find the right angles, and that's a method that works. And I think Brunson is. I'm curious to see how far New York can go, because Brunson's archetype generally is not one that leads a team to a deep playoff run, right? Like if you're talking about little guys who are like the best players on teams, it's like Steph Curry and Isaiah Thomas, and AI got to a finals, and that's like basically it. So I'm curious to see how far he can take them, but I do agree that just watching what they've done with Brunson does sort of give you a pathway for this is what you need around a guy like Cade. You do have some secondary ball handling with a guy like Deuce McBride, but for the most part, like he's the engine and it's flowed pretty well.
Well, and they could use like another wing that can really get a bucket or really create or something, right? But
yeah,
what do you think about that? Like when you heard, I think you were watching the other day when he brought up the Cade Brunson. Did you kind of agree? Did you shake your head like, oh, that kind of makes sense?
I completely agreed. I thought that was perfect. I thought that's exactly how I think the Knicks are one of the teams that the Pistons should be looking at what they've done.
Don't you think perfect? It fits the whole thing they've been selling us of toughness, defense, rebounding, but then you have this star.
And Brunson operates in like a lot of the same spaces Cade does.
Yes.
They to take a lot of mid-range shots. They like to, or Cade at least would like to draw fouls, but they operate a lot in the mid-range area. Cade's trying to improve that pull-up three-point shot, like a lot. And like you said, he's the engine of the offense. So yeah, I think it's pretty perfect.
And think about the guys that play off of him. Dante DiVincenzo was one of the best three-point shooters in the league this year on crazy high volume. You have wing defenders.
None of those guys are superstars. None of those guys are even probably all-stars. They're just guys that fit what their best player needs from them.
And Deuce is only thriving because he's been shooting lights out since he got his opportunity, with credit to him. But then they put wing defense. And again, they could use another score. Like they're not going to go all the way to the championship because they're probably missing that piece. Milwaukee, Dame Lillard, and then that's it. The interesting one is Cleveland.
So we're going to wrap it up there. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a teaser there. We're going to cut it off right there. If you want to hear the next part, what we were talking about, where the conversation goes, stay tuned for tomorrow's episode. It's going to be the second part of this episode with the Pistons Pulse. I'll see you guys then. Stay safe out there. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, stay tuned for tomorrow. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe and peace out.